Today we read one of the most amazing love stories ever written. We read of a young girl who is mistreated by her family working in the vineyards. She meets a young man who she assumes to be a shepherd, though she doesn't know where he's from or what he's about. But they fall madly in love, and he promises that he will return and they will be married. They're engaged, and he goes off, and she's pining for him. And in her bed she has dreams. Where is he? Where is he? He's coming, he's not coming. Is he coming back? Her heart is really torn. And then, one day, the royal carriages arrive. And she wonders what's going on. And a young man, the king, gets out of the carriage, and she realizes it's her lover. He's come back to marry her. And there is this beautiful sense of the full wedding and the wonder of them being together. We shan't mention the fact that she's number 61 and he has another 80 concubines at this stage, but that's not the point. For us, there is a wonderful story there that the shepherd has caused us to be engaged to him. We've fallen in love with Jesus. And we don't need to doubt that one day he is coming back. And there is a wonderful marriage. The Lamb and his bride. That marriage and the marriage feast is ahead for us. What an amazing love story. Today we're continuing reading about Solomon's life. We've read some of his wisdom through the Proverbs, and now we're looking at the end of his life. We saw that he'd married the princess of Egypt, a political alliance, and now he's married into the royal families of all of the nations around. God has said, do not marry into these nations, yet Solomon has done so, and he's brought these wives into Jerusalem, and with them have come their gods. 3 of the gods are actually mentioned. It's worth looking at them. The first one is the god of the Sidonians, Ashtaroth. And that god is a god that represents wealth and increase. The next god is the god Molech, who is from the Ammonites. And that god represents fame and power. And what we know about Molech is that it's the god to whom children are sacrificed. And then we have Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, the god of sexual gratification. And it is that god that was the god of the Moabites, who at the time of Balaam trapped Israel into exactly that, into sexual sin. And God appears to Solomon again and says, I made promises to you, but now you have failed, you have walked away, and I am going to take the nation away from you. 2 things. One, because of what I promised to David, I am not taking it completely away, and I won't do it until after you yourself have gone. That's a concern, and right now we see that several people began to rise up against Solomon. Hadad and Rezon are mentioned, and these are people who were bitter against David, and when the opportunity came, took it out on Solomon. But there was another man, Jeroboam, a man of great skill. And Solomon had seen his skill and put him over the rebuilding of parts of the wall. And God had seen his skill, and a prophet came to him and said, God has chosen you to take the nation from Solomon. And the prophet came and ripped up his coat and gave certain parts of it to Jeroboam and said, I'm keeping one part for Solomon's family, but the rest of it is yours. The fantastically strange thing about this is that Jeroboam was given the same promise that David had. David saw the Lord's hand in it and served the king faithfully. Jeroboam, as soon as this happened, immediately began to rebel against the rightful king. This is going to be such a critical point in the entire history of Judah and Israel. This chapter we've read today is the beginning of the northern kingdom. The book of Ecclesiastes is one of the strangest books in the Bible. We have a word that would describe it, meaning Ecclesiastes, ecclesia, which means assembly. If you're looking in the Hebrew Bible, you would find it being called a word that means teacher or preacher. It doesn't really capture what we're looking at here. What we're looking at is Solomon in his old age displaying all his wisdom that he has gained through his life. And he lays it out like a lecturer would lay it out in a philosophy lecture. He shows all the different philosophies that have ever been in the world. Whether it's existentialism or whether it's humanism, whether it's communism, whatever it is, every ism that has been there is displayed by Solomon. And he said, all of these isms are false. They all fall down. There is only God's truth and God who is able to sustain. And even there, Solomon does not refer to God in the term that we used to see in the Yahweh, the Lord. He always refers to him as God, Elohim, God the Creator. In this book, we don't see Solomon describing God as his Savior. He finds him talking about God, his Creator. But we see him saying, amongst every philosophy, God rules supreme. It's interesting that humanism, its main philosophy is for the happiness of man. And man is so determined to be happy. But Solomon lays it out that man was made for God's pleasure, not God for man's pleasure. We are here to serve the Lord with all of our hearts and all of our minds and all of our soul and all of our strength. That is the call and purpose of man, to fear the Lord. As we continue to read the book of Ecclesiastes, we continue to see the lecturer standing there before his audience, describing the various isms of the world philosophy and showing their futility, and then showing how it is only the Lord who has the answer, and he does have the answer. And then we move on just a change of gear, and it's almost like we've plunged ourselves back into the book of Proverbs and the wisdom proverbs. And as we go through, we see those 1 and 2 liners about the power of wisdom and the effect of wisdom. But in there's a sweet little story about a small town that was besieged by a great king. And within the town, there was a man of wisdom who led the small town to victory over the great king. He said the shame was that when the king had gone, the man of wisdom was forgotten and the people returned to their insecurity. And it just struck me as I was reading that about how often through history we've seen a nation struggling. And the Lord has sent a spirit of revival and a spirit of his wisdom into the nation. The people have prayed and that the nation has turned around. And yet after there is the salvation, there is the falling away. There is the forgetting again. When things are no longer a trouble, people forget about God. That's so sad. And it's important that we as the church remember that our responsibility is to bring the wisdom of God and not allow his wisdom to be forgotten when situations come easier. There's something about today's passages that make you say, if only this had happened, if only that had happened, if only he'd done this, if only he'd done that. As we look at it, Solomon has died and his son Rehoboam has taken the throne. The young man Jeroboam, who had been told by God that he was going to receive the northern kingdoms, has gone, he's run to Egypt and he's been brought back at the death of Solomon. He's been elected to be leader of the north, and he comes and faces Rehoboam. And the demand is made of the new king, reduce the stress that your father put on us. And Rehoboam went to the older men and received counsel. The counsel was, if you would humble yourself and reduce these weights that the people are under, they will serve you. And he went to the younger men and they said, crush them. He took the bad advice, and because of that there was separation. Instantly the north and the south were separated, and Rehoboam was then ready to go to war to get them back, had a prophet not come in and said, no, this is what God's doing. But just wonder sometimes what would have happened if that young man, Rehoboam, had just said, I'll take the good advice. I know that God would have completed his promise to Jeroboam, but who knows how he would have done it. And then we find Jeroboam, a man who has been called by God to lead the tribes, immediately using his own thinking, his own ideas. He erects 2 calves and said, these will replace the temple. If my people go to the temple, they will be swung back. I need something. He has erected these calves and said, these represent God. In fact, I'll have my own priests. I'll have my own religion. It is serving God, but it's my own religion. How foolish this young man was when so much had been given to him, so many promises had been made to him, and yet he has chosen to go his own way. How foolish not to listen to what God says. How foolish to think that we know better than him. God had made a promise. Doing it our own way will never fulfill it. Today we race through another 20-25 years of the history of the north and southern kingdoms. In the south, Asa is on the throne. As a young man, the king of Ethiopia came against Asa. And Asa called out to the Lord and said, who is there that can help the weak against the strong, the powerless against the mighty, except you? And in that he put his faith in the Lord, and the Lord brought him through, and they gave them victory. And Asa instituted massive reforms. He had the people learning again what the word was saying. He had the people again turning to God. But as his reign went on, his heart became colder, his faith became less. And when the king of the north came against him, Asa called out to a neighboring nation and said, please help, I'll pay you to help. The Lord was angry with Asa about this and sent a prophet to tell him what he'd done. Asa didn't learn his lesson because at the very end of his life, his feet were diseased. And instead of calling on the Lord for help, he called on the physicians. Meanwhile, in the north, things are going from bad to worse. We're seeing kings being murdered and rebels coming up and all sorts of things. And we've gone through quite a number of kings in this period. But at the end of today, we have a new king on the throne, and his name is Ahab. And we're going to see a little bit about him over the next few days. Today we race through another 20-25 years of the history of the north and southern kingdoms. In the south, Asa is on the throne. As a young man, the king of Ethiopia came against Asa. And Asa called out to the Lord and said, who is there that can help the weak against the strong, the powerless against the mighty, except you? And in that he put his faith in the Lord, and the Lord brought him through, and they gave them victory. And Asa instituted massive reforms. He had the people learning again what the word was saying. He had the people again turning to God. But as his reign went on, his heart became colder, his faith became less. And when the king of the north came against him, Asa called out to a neighboring nation and said, "Please help, I'll pay you to help." The Lord was angry with Asa about this and sent a prophet to tell him what he'd done. Asa didn't learn his lesson because at the very end of his life, his feet were diseased. And instead of calling on the Lord for help, he called on the physicians. Meanwhile, in the north, things are going from bad to worse. We're seeing kings being murdered and rebels coming up and all sorts of things. And we've gone through quite a number of kings in this period. But at the end of today, we have a new king on the throne, and his name is Ahab. And we're going to see a little bit about him over the next few days. Today's passages must have been preached thousands of times over the years. There are so many stories, so many verses that just capture the attention. Elijah has just declared a famine over the land and then gone up into Sidon. And we have the passages there about the widow with just a little bit of food that she's going to eat. But she gives it to the man of God, and the Lord supplies, the Lord supplies, the Lord supplies, the Lord will supply. When we give what we have to him, he will always supply our needs. And as we move on, the Lord told Elijah, "Go and tell Ahab, the famine is over. The rains are coming again." And we have the massive showdown with the prophets of Baal. The Lord shows himself strong. He shows himself mighty. His way is declared. But what happens to poor Elijah is that in the moment of this great victory, that moment of seeing the future coming, the cloud the size of a man's hand becoming a great thunderstorm, that the Jezebel comes after him again. And he runs and is afraid. You know, it's funny that it's at that point the Lord meets Elijah afresh. He gives him a revelation of who he is and what he can do and says, "Now, you have seen me. You have seen what I've done. You've been on that mountain. You've seen the very presence of God. Now go and institute the next part of my plan. I am going to bring my judgment, first of all, upon the people who have come against my people. But I'm also going to bring judgment on the people that call my name." Elijah went and began to carry out the work of the Lord afresh, with a new vigor and a new heart. God was doing something to cleanse the people. Ahab, king of Israel, was one of the worst kings that Israel ever had. He was terribly influenced by his wife Jezebel, and he served after the gods of the Ammonites. And yet, when the king of Aram, Ben-Hadad, came against him, the Lord gave Ahab a victory. Now, the thing is that it wasn't Ahab that had the victory, it was the Lord, because Ben-Hadad had come against the name of the Lord. And coming against the name of the Lord was a sure way to lose, because the Lord will defend his name. He is jealous of his name. And King Ben-Hadad is given into Ahab's hands. And Ahab shows him what looks like mercy, but is actually disobedience, because the Lord has said, "I am going to judge Ben-Hadad," but also it is compromise, not mercy. Mercy is given when the person has no way of getting their freedom. But Ben-Hadad buys his freedom. God is angry with Ahab and tells him that that is the end. And he goes away all upset and self-pitying. And his wife says, "Oh, what's wrong with you?" And something's turned up as well, that he hasn't got his own way. And his wife engineers the death of Naboth. The vineyard is given to him, and Elijah comes. And Ahab is confronted with the sin that he has committed, even though it is his wife that has committed, and she is not mentioned. But what we see then is that Ahab this time realizes his guilt and his sin and repents of it. And even in those circumstances, God is merciful. And he turns and says, Ahab, I will not punish you in your generation, but I will rip the nation away from your children. God is merciful, and he is also just. He is jealous over his name, and he will give victory, but sometimes those victories come to those who are being used by God, even though they are not on his side. As we look at history, and we even look at things around us these days, we must realize that God is the one who is both just and jealous. King Jehoshaphat of Judah has allied himself with King Ahab of Israel. And they've gone into battle together, and Ahab has been killed, and Jehoshaphat returns home. And on his return, he's met by a prophet who said, what have you been doing? Why have you allied yourself with this wicked man? And Jehoshaphat turns and repents of his sin. But just doesn't repent. He then goes and institutes a whole measure of changes. He's instituting judges. He's putting the Levites back in place. He's cleansing the land. The high places are taken away. And he begins to settle again. There is peace in the land. And just as that comes, there is an army, a vast army, coming against him from all and allies of all of the nations around, and they're all coming. And Jehoshaphat does not fear, but he turns to the Lord and said, Lord, you brought victory over these people before. We believe in you to bring victory again. And he calls the people together. And as the people come together, the Holy Spirit comes on one of the prophets. And he says, do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed. Take courage. You don't have to fight this battle. The battle is the Lord's. How often we need to recognize that if we have courage, the battle is the Lord's. And the people gathered together and said, we're going to go into battle. The Lord says, you won't even have to fight the battle. Just stand in your places. And as the people came together, they said, let us send out the musicians. Let us praise the Lord. And they went before the army, and the army stood in its place. And as soon as the praise came, the enemy was defeated and ran. Praise God. When the enemy hears the sound of praise, he will run. The battle is the Lord's. These are things that we need to hear in our own lives day by day and declare the battle is the Lord's. He is the one that brings the victory. Our job is to stand and praise his name, and the enemy will run. Sometimes it seems that when something really evil is replaced by something not so evil, the new thing appears almost as though it's good. And I think that's what Jeroboam must have thought, because he'd been significantly confronted about his relationship with Ahab. And now Ahab has gone, and his son Ahaziah has come to the throne, and himself has been removed. And then a new son, Joram, comes to the throne. He makes reforms and removes the high places, although he does not remove those golden calves that Jeroboam had put up. And the religion of Jeroboam was not removed from Israel. But now Jehoshaphat has made an alliance with Jeroboam, and they come together, and they're attacked against the king of Moab, and they've gone and they've actually got themselves absolutely into a difficult place. They've come and they're in front of him. They're in the desert ahead of Moab, and they're in the wrong place. And they call Elisha. Elisha is described as the man who used to wash Elijah's hand. He's a man who has learned his prophetic trade in service to the great prophet. And he says, bring some musicians, let the music flow, let the praise of God arise. And then in that, we see the outflowing of the Spirit, and a mighty word about the outpouring of the water. And even as we sense that, we see the outpouring of the Holy Spirit bringing victory in our lives. Jehoshaphat had made a mistake again of lining up, but the Lord had again come through for them. The Lord is so good and so merciful. But just as an aside, we then have Jehoram, who is Jehoshaphat's son, coming to the throne. And this young man had been born before Jehoshaphat came to the throne. His life, in his early life, was spent with when his father had relationship and was in league with Ahab. And the end of his life, his father is in league with Ahab's son. And he goes and marries one of Ahab's daughters. From one of the great kings, we have someone who has turned the kingdom back down. There's so much for us to learn in this. We need to keep our eyes on the Lord and not judge things against what is good and what is bad on a grayscale, but know there is right and wrong and stick to what is right.